Nestled in the rolling hills and rich farmland at the confluence of the Minnesota and Cottonwood rivers is the town of New Ulm in Brown County, Minnesota. It was founded in 1854 by German immigrants from the Chicago Land Association. They were joined 2 years later by members of the Cincinnati Turner Society, or Turnverein, and other immigrants from Switzerland, Austria, and Bohemia. New Ulm is in the southwestern part of the state that was once the land of the American Indians, known as the Dakota. After treaties in 1851, the Dakota lived on a narrow reservation along the Minnesota River. New Ulm was designed in a grid pattern, except where the rivers were concerned, similar to the European towns the immigrants were used to. The centrally located courthouse was adjacent to the important social and educational center, the Turner Hall. The Turners, which means gymnast, were seeking to establish a community that promoted education and physical fitness. Also, the German language, culture, literature, and values. The German immigrants brought with them Old World customs, art, and architecture, such as the German Renaissance-style post office built in 1910. It is now home to the Brown County Historical Society and Museum, which contributed the majority of the pictures in this presentation. In August 1862, some of the Dakota, driven by near starvation and broken promises and treaties with the United States government, attacked white settlers in the Minnesota River Valley. New Ulm was the site of the biggest pitched battle of the conflict. It was a tragic clash of two cultures who had lived side by side but became divided by hatred, fear, and misunderstanding. The people of New Ulm rebuilt to become the primary agricultural center for the area. Newcomers continued to settle there, and among them was a remarkably talented group of artists. Their meeting was most fortunate in what was then a rural area of the Midwest, far removed from established artistic communities. A significant member of this New Ulm artist group was Anton Gåg, a young German-Bohemian immigrant. Many people know of Wanda Gåg, a famous artist as well as picture book author and illustrator. However, few know of her father, Anton. He lived fewer than 50 years, but his art has become a valuable legacy. It blended the old world and the new, not only for the people of southern Minnesota, but for all of us interested in the American immigrant experience. Anton and his colleagues painted panoramic scenes about the Dakota conflict, a series of large canvases that were a popular type of traveling show in the 19th century. As an early photographer, Anton took a group picture in 1890 of the first settlers of New Ulm, from which the artist Peter Kaler drew his rendition 47 years later. And still today, paintings and other decorative work by Anton and his associates adorn the sanctuary in New Ulm's Cathedral of the Holy Trinity. Paintings signed by him, or attributed to him over the years, can be found at the Brown County and Minnesota Historical Societies, as well as other institutions and homes. Some important aspects of the artist's life and times can be pieced together from these works. Anton, on the left, was born June 13, 1858, youngest of the 4 surviving children of George and Teresa Gåg, seated with their daughter Margarita standing in the middle. The family came from the village of Valk in the German-speaking western rim of Bohemia. It was then a province of the Austro-Hungarian Empire and is now part of the Czech Republic. Valk was a typical farming community where the villagers lived and housed their stock, going out daily to work in the fields. The area is known still today as the Böhmerwald, or Bohemian Forest, a great ridge of high wooded hills along the Czech-German border. To the southwest is Bavaria, which is another area that would play a part in Anton's story. It was memory of the fabled Bohemian Forest that made German-Bohemian immigrants homesick and instilled in them their love of nature. All his life, Anton would tell the folk tales and sing the romantic songs, such as Tief drin im Böhmerwald, about his beautiful homeland. As a boy, he drew on slabs of wood with bits of coal and practiced a tradition of wood carving, as in this example from the region. His skills in carving included religious figures, such as the Madonna, to place in shrines inside hollowed-out tree trunks. A bridge across from Anton's former home in Valk remains today. As a boy, he walked through the forest to the nearby town of Pernartes to go to school and to church. The family spoke a Bohemian dialect of German at home, but at school he learned formal German and also took music lessons. He had a fine tenor voice and could play several musical instruments. He attended the Catholic Church of Saints Peter and Paul. At an early age, however, he developed a religious philosophy that was more liberal and free-thinking than that taught by his priest. The church in Pernartes is an example of the 17th and 18th century Rococo architecture that is famous in the area. In 1872, Anton's 24-year-old sister Anna immigrated to America to work on the John Seifert farm near New Ulm. She was perhaps encouraged to come to the New World by her father's cousin, Peter Gåg, whose farm was next to the Seifert farm. The next year, Anton sailed with his parents on the SS Ohio from the German port of Bremen, arriving in Baltimore on May 30, 1873. A few months later, they arrived at the landing in St. Paul. Young Anton's ambition was to be an artist, and he expressed a particular desire to draw pictures of American Indians in the New World. On the ship's passenger manifest, the family was listed as 55-year-old George Gåg and wife Teresa, sons Joseph and 14-year-old Anton, daughter Margarita, and her new husband, Vincent Klaus. George had been a master carpenter in Bohemia and planned to go into business with an Austrian friend in New Ulm. So he traveled on to Brown County, and within a year, Teresa left St. Paul to join him. Margarita and Joseph posed in St. Paul, where they remained with Vincent and Anton. Joseph became a tailor. Vincent worked in a brewery. Young Anton was listed in the 1877 city directory as an artist, and the next year as a cigar maker. He also may have begun to learn photography in St. Paul. The young people lived on Eagle Street. This was the rough, tough, and crowded Upper Levee district along the banks of the Mississippi, where many immigrants settled. Anton drew a charcoal portrait of his father. George died in November 1877 while digging a well in New Ulm for his home on land he bought on a wooded hilltop called the Immelberg. The next year, Vincent and Margarita left St. Paul to join Teresa on the Immelberg, where they also bought land. When he was around 20 years old, Anton painted his first portrait. In St. Paul, he was exposed to art other than the folk traditions of the Böhmerwald. He became friends with at least one other struggling young painter, Nicholas Brewer. He carried a small sketchbook for pencil and watercolor drawings during 1878 and 79. One scene, apparently drawn from an upstairs window, was a strikingly similar viewpoint he would use again in paintings toward the end of his life. He designed his own calling card, anglicizing his name to Anthony J. Gåg, or sometimes just Tony. The J might stand for Jerome, since years later he named his only son, Howard Anthony Jerome. Around 1879, Anton left for New Ulm, perhaps aboard a steamboat. At the town of St. Peter, he sketched the Minnesota River, the first of numerous renderings he would make of the river he grew to love and paint so well. Joseph was the only one to stay behind in St. Paul, where he married and had a son, Joseph Jr. The remainder of Anton's sketchbook includes drawings that were made in his new southwestern Minnesota home. 3 sketches, for instance, are much like photos of the grown children, Emily, Otto, and Augusta, of the brewmaster August Schell, one of the founding turners of New Ulm. Anton became lifelong friends of August Schell and his sons. They are pictured earlier when Adolf on the left and Otto on the right were boys. August became the young artist's patron, buying him paints, brushes, and canvas. Schell's brewery had been built in a valley below the Immelberg, the steep hillside in the background. Anton lived on top of the hill with his family. Brother-in-law Vincent worked at the brewery and perhaps introduced Anton to the Shells. The small brewery along the Cottonwood River is a thriving business still today. It is the oldest, largest, and most well-known brewery in Minnesota. Wooded slopes of the Immelberg might well have reminded Anton and his family of forests in Bohemia. The broad, flat top of the hill is a residential area today where both George Glotzbach and Vincent Klaus bought parcels of land. At the end of the street is a clearing that appears never to have been developed, leading to the back of the brewery below. One can picture Vincent taking this path to work, and perhaps Anton walking down to visit the Shells or to work at the brewery himself. On the brewery grounds, the Shells had a workers' dormitory and guest house. They gave Anton a free hand in decorating walls of one large room. The young man transformed them into woodland landscapes reminiscent of the Böhmerwald. All that remains today is an exhibit under glass of a 3-dimensional mountain scene, complete with a village peopled by dolls in the old-world costumes. Schell himself carved the tiny train with its red and black engine and tiny yellow windows on the passenger cars. The train was mechanized to run around the mountain curves. As it passed through the village, little figures waved small handkerchiefs. The whole scene came to life like an animated fairy tale. Anton spent many evenings at the guest house, playing music, sharing stories, and often teaching others to paint. Schell recognized Anton's talent, and he used his resources to subsidize the young man. With Schell's financial support, Anton studied art for a few months in Chicago and then Milwaukee. In 1880, he sent 4 paintings from Chicago for Schell to frame and exhibit at the post office. They were then raffled off at 50 cents a ticket to raise money so the young man could continue his studies. One was his version of the Muses, sister goddesses in classical mythology who presided over the various arts. From the left are tragedy, then painting, music in the middle, astronomy, and poetry on the right. Another was an anonymous seascape, haunting and dramatic. When he returned to New Ulm, Anton set himself up as a professional artist, with portraits providing the steadiest income. Perhaps one of his first was of Jacob Huttinger, a local businessman, since his little sketchbook had included a pencil study for the painting. In 1883, he went into partnership downtown in a commercial photography studio. He combined portraiture and photography for a small tinted photo of Schell's daughter, Emma Schell Marty. He retouched the figure and the background with paint, a popular convention of the time. In 1885, Anton painted a small memento for Otto Schell, one of several the artist would make for friends over the years. At the brewery that year, August Schell built a handsome German manor house that he called Schell's Tal. The house stood beside the Cottonwood River, and along its banks, Schell established a deer sanctuary. The grounds were landscaped into a formal garden, reminiscent of gardens in Germany. By 1887, Schell and his wife, on the left, had installed an elaborate fountain at their new home. It was designed by Anton, complete with gargoyles for waterspouts, and on top, the figure of a barefoot boy carrying a water jug. Anton's daughter, Wanda Gåg, later wrote that Schell was someone who understood her father, which was not the case with some members of his own family. For his part, the young immigrant artist appears to have eagerly absorbed the beauty and refinement of the German culture he found at Schell's Tal. The grounds at Schell's today offer an opportunity to explore the differences Anton must have found between a life of wealth, grace, and privilege and his own humble upbringing. Members of the local German Turner Society, such as Schell, were urbanized, educated, and highly respected. These founding Turners of New Ulm were known to enjoy a superior cultural and social position. They beautified their new surroundings in classical Old World style. The powerful Turners were also liberals, idealists, and freethinkers. This set them apart dramatically from the conservative Lutherans and Roman Catholics among the other German, Austrian, Swiss, and Bohemian settlers in the area. But Anton, as a boy, had become a freethinker himself, and in this aspect now found with the Shells a like-minded liberal philosophy. Anton's family functioned at the opposite end of the political, economic, and social spectrum. The Gågs were of peasant stock and comparatively uneducated. Anton was the only one in the family who appears to have desired for himself the life of an artist, rather than the more common pursuits for immigrants of farmer, carpenter, stonemason, butcher, or day laborer. Thus, for young Anton, his life in New Ulm began with a merger of two social levels. He tried to maintain this union for the rest of his life through association with the Turners as sponsors, clients, and friends. At Schell's home, he met Ida Berndt and fell in love. Ida was the daughter of Julius Berndt, another of the founding Turners of New Ulm. Berndt was an influential architect, contractor, and surveyor who had recorded, as early as 1860, the growth of New Ulm in a series of lithographs. Berndt, like Schell before him, accepted Anton into his family, this time literally. On May 4, 1886, Anton and Ida were married. It was a month before Anton's 27th birthday and just 4 days before Ida turned 22. For most of his life, Anton's path would remain intertwined with his father-in-law. In June 1887, Ida gave birth to a daughter, Antonia. Tragedy followed. Ida died a few days later of fever following childbirth. Antonchen, as the baby was called, died before she was 6 weeks old. The bereaved young widower withdrew into himself, staying here at the home of his father-in-law, rather than with his own family on the Immelberg. Anton left Ida's sister Julia in charge of the photography studio, where he was now the sole proprietor. The young artist had always enjoyed roaming the countryside. It is said that during this troubled time, he once again turned to the beauty of the area's woods and rivers. We know he visited this brook that runs through a culvert to flow toward the Cottonwood River because he captured the scene on canvas as it looked then. Years later, his daughter Flavia said he also went to the Indian reservation. There, the Dakota posed for photos and drawings, provided He made a duplicate for them as payment. Flavia made her own sketch from childhood memories of Anton's paintings, at least 4 of which had been stacked in a corner of his studio when she was growing up. The Dakota had given him presents of beaded doeskin pouches, moccasins, and other artifacts, which he used later to authenticate his artwork of the native people. And so, Anton proved himself able to walk in yet a third world, that of the Native American, in addition to his own German-Bohemian heritage, and the social circles he had developed because of his connections with the Shells and the Bernts. The winter after Ida and Antonia died, Anton presented August and Teresa Schell with a delicate New Year's greeting card made of wood. Inside, a poem translated from the German expresses the young man's despondency. Out of my gloom, take this trifle, because your yearning love can wish nothing better. All I am and have, I thank you alone for which, until the grave, I will always be grateful. Your Anton. The same year as his marriage, Anton also painted a scene from the classical myth of Hero, who threw herself into the sea after her lover, Leander, had drowned. The painting is displayed beneath the drape on an easel in a photograph taken around 1889. Anton is on the left with 2 artist friends, Swiss immigrant Christian Heller in the middle, and on the right, Alexander Schwendinger, son of a prominent New Ulm stonecutter and sculptor from Austria. The 3 men ran an art school together that year, in rooms above a drugstore on New Ulm's main street. Chris and Anton posed as professional artists, probably as part of an advertising campaign to attract students. Even though the school lasted only a few months, the space probably remained as their studio for various artistic endeavors over the next several years. The walls of the school were decorated by one or all 3 artists or by some of their students. Chris had been educated in Switzerland, and Alex had studied art in Munich. Anton's daughter, Wanda, years later remembered that her father was once attempting to achieve a greater transparency in painting flesh. He lacked the formal training of his colleagues and lamented, "I can't get it, my Wanda. My friend Alex knows it. He learned it in Germany, but he won't tell me." The year 1891 began as another unhappy one for Anton, standing at the left on the porch of a medical sanitarium in Battle Creek, Michigan. A relationship with a young woman named Anna Ledrach ended badly, and she sued him for breach of promise. As part of the New Ulm court proceedings, his doctor diagnosed him with a nervous disorder, which required him to be hospitalized. Despite Anton's impassioned defense, Anna was awarded the sum of $500. Also in 1891, Anton photographed a large crowd that attended the dedication of a flag-draped monument in honor of the defenders of New Ulm during the 1862 Dakota conflict. The monument was erected on Center Street, near the home of John Lind, who in 1899 became governor of Minnesota. The occasion undoubtedly boosted Anton's spirits since, on the base of the monument, were 2 battle scenes originally drawn by him. 12 years after his arrival in New Ulm, and almost 30 years after the Dakota conflict itself, Anton remained intensely interested in the event. In 1887, he had gone to the State Historical Society in St. Paul to research for a series of paintings he planned. In an 1891 newspaper article about the monument's dedication, he and Alex were mentioned as working together on such paintings. Colonel William Fender, a Civil War veteran and prominent citizen of New Ulm, was a member of the committee that chose Anton as the artist for the monument, which is a New Ulm landmark today. There was also a family connection, as the colonel's son was married to Anton's sister-in-law. Another of his sisters-in-law, Julia, on the right, who was in charge at his photography studio, had hired a young woman as assistant. She was Elizabeth, or Lissy Biebel, on the left. Although Lissy had no experience in photography, Her skills at posing clients in natural and casual poses was so impressive that she was kept on when Anton returned to his business. Lissy's creativity often expressed itself through clothing design. Her courtship by Anton is said to have begun because of her charming appearance in an artist costume, complete with palette and paintbrushes, for a masquerade ball at Turner Hall. Lissy was 23 years old, a tiny woman, less than 5 feet tall, and weighing scarcely 90 pounds. She was friendly and kind, a happy companion for the 33-year-old Anton. In May 1892, they were married in a small service at the home of the bride's parents. They were also Bohemian immigrants living on a farm outside of New Ulm. The Beebles had immigrated from the same area of Bohemia as the Gågs, first to Pennsylvania and then in 1877 to Brown County. Anton stayed current with photographic techniques and, in fact, was an inventor of improvements for the camera. He advertised in the newspaper, quote, "I have equipped my gallery, now called the Elite Art Studio, according to the very latest methods. I am now able to show the people of New Ulm some surprises in photography," he said, such as an eye-fooling imitation of curled paper to frame his pictures. However, an unpleasant surprise for him was that Lissy's parents and sisters did not approve of the marriage. Their concerns appeared to focus on a fear that Anton would not be able to support her, possibly due to the recent news of the trial and his poor health, possibly because he was a struggling artist and photographer. By February 1893, Alex and Anton's series of 11 large paintings about the Dakota conflict went on display at their studio. The paintings comprised a type of mural called a cyclorama that was unwound panel by panel from vertical rollers. The defenders of New Ulm, as photographed by Anton, were available to tell the artist what had happened. Both Alex and Anton were acting as narrative or history painters, illustrating specific events as related to them by the survivors. The paintings portrayed respect for both sides in the conflict. Although they looked staged as in a theatrical presentation, they did not result in stereotypes of either the Dakota or the settlers. Anton had his collection of Indian regalia, and he was meticulous in his authentic portrayal of native people. His work did not glorify either side in the conflict, but simply documented it. Another of Anton's large paintings went on display at the Minnesota State Capitol in St. Paul. After Anton's daughter Wanda viewed it years later, she wrote, "With what mixed emotions Papa must have made these pictures. Naturally, he sympathized with the pioneers who, through no direct fault of their own, had been so brutally attacked, and yet I know he loved the Indians also and felt that they had been wronged." Anton also painted The Death of Minnehaha from Longfellow's epic The Song of Hiawatha, which the poet set in Minnesota. In Anton and Lissy's small apartment above the Elite Studio at 512 3rd North, their first daughter was born on March 11, 1893. She was named Wanda by her father, from a play he had seen, and Hazel by Lissy because of the baby's dark hazel eyes. Wanda would write later that her father liked to play the zither in the evenings and sing Bohemian songs. Both parents told stories. German was spoken at home, and Wanda spoke no English until she went to school. Her first Christmas tree was festooned in an old-world tradition with candles, ornaments, and treats. On the wall behind it can be seen some of the decorative work done by Anton, not only a landscape panel high in the background, but also ornamental scroll work on the walls below. In 1894, the Gågs had another daughter named Stella by her mother and Lona by her father. The family moved several times over the next few years. Newspaper accounts of Anton's business dealings indicated he involved himself in a wide range of endeavors to make a living. For instance, he sold his Elite Art Studio to fellow photographers Albert Meyer and Joseph Sattler in order to devote his time exclusively to painting. In 1895, Anton formed a partnership with Otto Sider and Chris Heller, shown here. They employed several workmen to help do artistic painting, frescoing, and decorative work in homes, churches, and other buildings. Perhaps Anton's painting of Mary ascending into heaven was done to show prospective clients what his new firm could do for church decorating. New Ulm was experiencing steady growth, and the firm of Heller, Sider, and Gåg, sometimes with Schwendinger joining them, was one of several businesses offering decorating services in the prosperous city. In October 1896, Anton was reported to have an art exhibition at Eckstein's drugstore in hopes of receiving commissions. No record remains of what the paintings were, but this still life might have been done around that time. The next month he returned to photography with Meyer as his partner at the Broadway Gallery. Lissy was now a photographer as well. She made loose, comfortable clothes and posed the children artistically. Her pictures were unique for that period when stiff artificiality for photographs was in vogue. They were happy, active children and began to draw as soon as they were able to hold pencils. Wanda especially tagged along with her father, asking questions about his art, which Anton took pains to answer carefully. During this time, he photographed a monument of Hermann the Cheruscan, the father of German independence from the Romans in 9 A.D. It was being erected on a ridge west of New Ulm. In September 1897, he also photographed the three-day celebration to dedicate the completed monument. It had been designed by Anton's former father-in-law, Julius Berndt. The next spring, a third daughter arrived in the Gåg household. She was named Tusnelda in honor of Hermann's wife, and Blondine because she was so fair. The impressive national monument, standing over 100 feet high, with Hermann himself standing 32 feet tall at the top, dominates the view above the city. It has become the best-known landmark in New Ulm. A painting of Hermann by Anton shows the legendary hero of the Cherusci tribe in the Teutoburg forest. There, the Romans were defeated, saving the Confederation of Germanic people from foreign oppression. Anton's business in photography and decorating were doing well enough by 1897 for the Gågs to move into a home at 226 North Washington Street, which Anton had helped design. It had a marvelous tower just outside a second-floor bedroom for the little girls to play in. Although meagerly furnished, the house had a hand pump and a sink in the pantry, as drawn by Flavia, and a furnace with heat coming up into the rooms through registers in the wall. Anton had an upstairs studio for photography, for painting, and for small decorative work. An example is a river scene painted on a round piece of tin, given as a wedding present in 1898 to his former brother-in-law, August Berndt. On a companion piece is a scene similar to the bluffs along the Minnesota River near the town of Sacred Heart. It includes an elegant but fictitious castle. The composition could have been inspired by stories of an imposing granite house built by Joseph Renshaw Brown. His home on the bluff had been destroyed during the Dakota conflict. For Anton and Chris, commissions came in for larger decorative work, such as a set of ceiling murals at St. Patrick's Church in West Albany, Minnesota, completed in 1898. After the Nativity is the Transfiguration, followed by Christ's descent into hell and the Assumption of Mary. The murals were done at the request of Anton's friend, Reverend Schwartz, an immigrant from Austria and the pastor at St. Patrick's. Rumor prevails that faces of certain members of the congregation were to be found in the scene in which Christ attacks the devil in hell. Anton and Chris insisted on fine craftsmanship from their employees and were popular with them because they took an interest in the men's well-being. Daughter Wanda once recalled how her father would give extra money to the workmen, saying, "Here, Tony, take this money and get some new overalls. Then you can come back to work again." Or, "The poor wretch, He had so many children he needs a little help. Or, the poor fellow, his wife has been ill again. In an undated painting, he depicts tents at Myers Creek, where he sometimes went camping with his employees. They posed in his collection of Dakota regalia so he could make sketches and photographs to use later in his work. In July 1899, a fourth daughter was born to the Gågs named Asta Theophilus. And 17 months later, another girl arrived, Daly Maryland, shown here in 1901 with Lissy in the backyard on North Washington Street. Primarily, the yard was a play place for the children. This was considered highly impractical to the other townsfolk in New Ulm, who had large vegetable gardens and sometimes kept farm animals. A most important source of income for Anton was the large-scale decorative work he and Chris began in 1901 for the new Turner Hall. The Turnverein had a theater the newspaper called a grand new opera house. Over the next 5 years, Anton and Chris decorated the walls as well as curtains and settings for the stage. On opening night of the new theater, the audience applauded the decorative work of Gåg and Heller. Most impressive was the front curtain, which survives only as a watercolor study. His daughter, Wanda, later told her biographer that the curtain portrayed the picturesque town of Hallstatt, which clings to a mountain at the edge of a lake in Bavaria. She said that the curtain gave him the greatest pleasure, for, to Anton, Hallstatt not only had great beauty, but culture, peace, and religious tolerance, qualities he considered necessary for happy living. All that remains of Anton's backdrop curtain is a study of the Myers Creek area that was used for the larger work. A landscape such as this once prompted him to write, translating from the German, "How can such a plain, simple motif evoke such an overpowering impression in us? But it is just this that constitutes art, and is the poetic spirit of the artist. How is that to be attained, you may cry? The answer is, by diligent observation, study, and practice." New scenes were added by Anton and Chris to the hall's Ratskeller, one of which was a painting by Heller of a castle in his native Switzerland. The hall is an historic site and plays a significant role in the life of New Ulm still today. Anton became a member of the Turnverein, and his children attended its gymnastics classes and kindergarten. By the summer of 1902, Lissy was again pregnant with a sixth child, due the next winter. She sat once again in the yard, this time with Asta, Daly, and Tusnelda, beside the ever-present poles for holding up clotheslines. The girls looked dressed up for the picture-taking. Lissy usually dressed them in less formal clothes to allow freedom for playtime, and they went barefoot in the summer, quite unheard of for the times. In December, a boy was born into the Gåg family, Howard Anthony Jerome. Wanda later recalled that her father had been in misery with an abscessed tooth, but in his delight, the toothache was quite suddenly forgotten, making his 5 daughters wonder what could be so special about having a boy baby. Early the next spring, with unmelted snow still evident, the little Gåg girls posed near the back house, with green lattice work around it. Appearing like stair steps in height, the girls are from left to right, Tusnelda, Asta, Stella, Daly, and Wanda. The Washington Street house was now alive with the activities of 6 young Gågs. As Anton said, "I may not have much money, but I am rich in children." Stella is on the left with the big bow, Daly stands on a chair in the middle, and Wanda is on the right in the dark dress. In front of her is Tusnelda, then Asta in the middle, and Howard on the left. Anton was known for being fair but strict. "When we call, you come. No whats or whys." The Queen Anne-style house today is owned by the Wanda Gåg House Association. It has been restored, including exterior paint in the 7 colors Anton originally selected. Inside, faint remains have been uncovered of decorations Anton painted on the walls instead of wallpaper, little embellishments which were popular at the time. A guided tour of the house offers a description of the dining room as decorated by Anton.
There's a painting up there. We can see gold, we can see green, and we can see blue. When it's wet, that grayish stuff up there is wallpaper. You can see something up there. And the restorer thinks that all the way around the perimeter of this room, there is probably a detailed scrolling, and maybe in the inside are the cherubs, the clouds up there.
Anton's studio in an upstairs back bedroom displays photographs from his elite art studio. He worked on inventions as well, such as a photography device, which he found to his dismay had just recently been patented in a similar form. One of his photos showed the gravestone of his father, George Glotzbach. Anton's brother, Joseph, had died in St. Paul in 1885, followed by his mother, Teresa, in 1898. The home on the Immelberg was occupied by his sister Margarita and brother-in-law Vincent, shown later as an older man with one of his grandchildren. Apparently, however, Anton was not close to his family and seems to have rarely seen them. The photography studio also displays the type of camera that Anton used. He once wrote to his oldest daughter, when she was learning to use his camera in his absence, "My dear Wanda, you write that you cannot get the plate out of the frame, but I told you, in case you do not get it out by hand, then take a pocket knife." In the studio is a small alcove where plaster decorations by Anton have been discovered intact on the ceiling and walls. As his family grew, Anton moved his studio into a third-floor attic with a skylight in the ceiling and paintings covering the walls. There were also two small unfinished rooms. One had long shelves where he kept his German books, art portfolios, as well as American Indian artifacts. The attic is where Anton allowed himself the luxury of one cigar on Sundays. He smoked while he painted many of his pictures. Often, he was in the company of Chris or Alex or even Wanda, sitting on the floor quietly observing. It was a wonderful room to the children, and often there was fruit to eat after it was no longer needed as a model for a still life. Another attic room was a playroom for rainy days. A display case shows children's small toys and other items that were found beneath the floorboards. Also on display is a merry-go-round, built by Lissy's brother, Joseph Biebel. The carousel once belonged to the children's author, Ruth Grim, whose children donated it to the Gåg house. The carousel is one that Uncle Josie made for the Gåg children as well. Although both Josie on the left and Lissy's older brother Frank on the right were farmers by occupation, they were also artists and craftsmen. They remained friendly with Anton and delighted his children with homemade gifts. The Gåg children spent many summer days with the grandma folks, where Lissy's brothers and sisters also lived. Wanda remembered that Grandpa Joseph Biebel was a remarkable storyteller, but not a very successful farmer. Grandma Magdalena made life more pleasant with a generous and joyful spirit. To get to the Biebel farm, the children walked through the German-Bohemian section of New Ulm, affectionately called Goosetown. Goosetown had an old-world village atmosphere of large vegetable gardens and flocks of geese wandering the unpaved streets. Women earned extra money, making lace and selling goose feather bedding. In 1991, a monument to the German-Bohemian settlers in the area was erected in German Park. Wanda often made pencil sketches of the grandma folks or her siblings. Anton was always ready to praise good work, saying, "Yes, something may come of her some day," or, "I have thought and sometimes hoped that Wanda would become a musician, but I believe that even now she loves drawing too well to put much time on music." He was gentle but firm, encouraging her to draw from life, never tracing or copying. And he would say, If it's too hard for you to draw the whole figure, start with the arms and legs. The rest will come. Wanda later wrote that these family years were a period of deep contentment and happiness, and her parents were exactly the right kind of papa and mama. Yet, to the more conservative townspeople of New Ulm, Anton and Lissy's artistic, free-thinking lifestyle was not as enthusiastically acceptable. Research indicates that many turn-of-the-century Midwestern communities were not always supportive of artists in their own midst. This underlying strain generated a certain degree of tension. Public criticism over the family's nonconformity could have played a significant part in the respect, appreciation, and financial success Anton attained during his own lifetime, and in the well-being of his family after he was gone. In 1903, Chris and Anton's studio was commissioned to decorate New Ulm's Holy Trinity Catholic Church with religious scenes and figures. The entire ceiling of the sanctuary, as well as the wall of the apse, comprised a total work of art completed at a cost of $3,800. Of this many-faceted and complex total work, it is impossible to know which was painted by Anton, Chris, Alex, or hired workmen. Local legend is that the faces of Anton's children appear as the cherubs that hover above the archangels. Neither Heller nor Gåg was a good businessman. When someone once said that they did not charge enough for their work, Anton replied, "Why do we have friends if we cannot give of ourselves to them?" After years of painting in the cold dampness of high-ceiling churches, often working lying down on tall scaffolding, Anton and Chris were both diagnosed with occupational tuberculosis in 1906. Anton also had an operation to relieve the pain of varicose veins in his legs. Chris had once spent time in Oregon for purposes of improving his health. In 1907, Anton spent several weeks there himself. His painting of the coast was a return to the style he often used for his Minnesota river scenes. Other Oregon scenes appear to have been painted from his upstairs window. Far from the serenity of this Oregon setting, when he returned to New Ulm, his church decorating kept him away for weeks at a time. He was working in Mankato on May 24, 1907, when Lissy gave birth to their seventh child, a girl she and Wanda named Flavia Betty Salome. One of his last paintings perhaps represented nostalgia for Bohemia, as well as another scene that is said to strongly resemble his birthplace, the village of Valk. 5 years after he completed his self-portrait, Anton's health failed rapidly, until, at age 49, he was bedridden and forced to stop work altogether. In April 1908, he went to a specialist in St. Paul, but nothing could be done about the tubercular lesions in his throat. Anton's friend, Otto Schell, went with him on the train. As they returned home, Anton is reported to have said, "Don't feel so bad about it, Otto. I'm grateful to have had this last long look at our beautiful Minnesota countryside. You have been my lifelong friend. When I am gone, will you watch over my family? It's not going to be easy for them." But Schell himself was to die just 3 years after Anton. On May 22, 1908, a few weeks before his 50th birthday, Anton died at home, in the bed set up for him in the parlor during his last days. 3 days later, on baby Flavia's first birthday, his funeral services were held at Turner Hall. The community, which the newspaper said was just beginning to appreciate Mr. Gåg at his true worth, lined the streets as the procession wound its way to the city cemetery. He was buried beneath the same gravestone that was inscribed on the other side with the names of Ida and Antonia. Business details for the studio had always been taken care of by Uncle Heller as the Gåg children called him. A month after Anton's funeral, Chris returned to his family home in Youngstown, Ohio, where he died at age 45, 3 months after Anton. Alex and his brother Theodore, who designed these elaborate grave markers in the New Ulm Cemetery, continued in their sculptor father's footsteps. Alex married and had 5 children and remained in the business of decorating houses, churches, and other public buildings until his death in 1934 at age 71. Lissy Gåg and the children had $1,200 in insurance when Anton died. Also, an allotment of $1 a month for each of them from the county. Neighbors were kind and helpful. Lissy's sisters brought clothes for the children. Her brothers and Anton's sister brought vegetables in from their farms. But family tensions over the years left Lissy primarily alone to struggle with the burdens of a large family, especially after the deaths of Anton's friends and colleagues. In 1912, Lissy's father died, followed by her mother in 1916. Lissy herself was severely depressed and in frail health. The doctor diagnosed galloping consumption. In 1917, during a January blizzard, she died at home with Wanda at her bedside. Lissy was buried beside Anton. A guardian for the children was appointed by the court. A housekeeper was paid for by well-meaning friends, and members of a church group offered to adopt the younger Gågs. But none of these were acceptable to Wanda, who, at age 24, was left in charge of her brother and 5 sisters. Wanda kept the family intact. Although the children endured incredible hardships, they were independent, talented, and inventive. All managed to finish high school, living together and supporting each other, until eventually all but Stella settled on the East Coast. From her father's bedside, Wanda had received his last words. What Papa was unable to accomplish, Wanda will have to finish. She might well have interpreted this not only to pursue the life of an artist, but also to take care of the youngsters, as she called her siblings, all of which she did admirably. The influence of Anton's landscape painting can be seen in many of Wanda's subsequent works of art. She achieved worldwide acclaim for her contributions to children's books, art, and literature. At the Gåg's Washington Street house, a plaque reads, "Home of Wanda Gåg, artist and author." Flavia returned to New Ulm several times to study works by Anton and to visit relatives in the city that she said was, for her, like no other. She also became an artist and author of children's books, as well as a musician like her brother, Howard. In her landscape painting, she too followed in the footsteps of the father she had never known. Anton Gåg, German-Bohemian artist from New Ulm, bequeathed to his family and to his adopted country a far richer legacy than he would ever know.